1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, Chair.
All right, welcome everyone to the August 19th special call meeting of the Joint Development Authority between the Unified Government and the City of Winterville, starting at 3:33. First thing on the agenda is the approval of our agenda. I'd like to put forth a motion to approve the agenda.
Stephanie will second that.
All right, 70 seconds. Any discussion of the agenda for today? All right, not hearing any. All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No opposition. Agenda is approved unanimously. Next item is to look at our minutes from the last meeting. So I'm going to have to start quickly because I. Okay. I'd like to put forth a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second to that? Somebody else want to call a second?
Stephanie will second. I was giving other people a chance.
All right. Well, speak up. Forever hold your peace. All right.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry. Some people just arrived to cut down trees and my dogs are crazy, so.
I understand.
All right.
Yeah, that'll drive my dog crazy too. All right, we have a motion and a second for the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at them? Do you see any things that need to be corrected on the minutes? Actually, I am seeing one thing. We started the meeting at 3:30. Did we only end a half an hour later at 4?
Did we start it earlier last week?
We started at 3:30, and Tim put 3:33, which is fine, same as today. But at the end of the meeting for adjournment, it says meeting adjourned at 4. I'd have to go back to listen exactly when, but it was not a half an hour meeting.
No, I think I have that wrong since it doesn't have. Usually, I put in the colon. I don't leave time like that, so I must have gotten somehow taken off. I'll go back in and see how long it was.
I think we'll just say that we completed our work at 5 o'clock. In fact, I remember somebody had to go to
5 after, I think it was.
Right, because somebody had to go to another meeting right after that. So 5:05.
Yeah, it was just after.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that needs to be corrected for that? All right. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the revised minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? No opposition. The minutes approved unanimously. Let's go to the next agenda item. Yeah. Let me find all my stuff here. Well, I know what it is, but let me find it here real quick. Okay, it's continue our RLF discussion. Basically, I want to focus on the administrator and the responses we got. As you saw, you should have seen a document from First American Bank with their proposal. They were the only bank that responded by the deadline. So currently, they're the only one under consideration. There it is. So just to let you know, Ilka, Stephanie, and I had a Zoom call with Rhodes McClanahan. He's the president of First American, and we talked about two things. One is whether they would be responsible for actually entering the data on our behalf, especially if we get so many applications that we can't. Those who can do it can't do it, and he's amenable to it. I don't think his quote of minimum of $100 may be adequate to for the time that one of his staff would have to spend filling in the information. I personally would like to have them handle that part of it. What are the thoughts of the rest of the directors?
David, I think it might be important to point out that we went through our process, the spreadsheet, the application, so Rhodes is familiar with what we had proposed to do. And with
Right.
that in mind, if he's willing to do it, I like the idea of them doing it.
Yeah, I would prefer they do it. It's just that they may charge 125 instead of 100, but because they,
Right.
They left it as a place marker that they might have to charge more if it's more work. So I agree. That would be my preference as well. Anybody have any counter thoughts to that?
I guess I'm curious, what really are the other options available to us?
Well, originally it was going to be those of us who had experience, especially in reading profit and loss statements and bank statements, to actually enter the data into the spreadsheet. And, Stephanie and I and Erica were three names that came up as possibilities. So it'd be either JDA members, or the other thing under consideration was to have First American staff do that, with the understanding that they're be not held liable for mistakes made on their part in filling out these forms.
Mr. Chairman, there is a third option, which is to hire a consultant, an independent contractor to do it. And I believe if it were necessary, we could find somebody who's a certified economic development finance professional, not even with a regional commission or SBDC to do it. But I do agree it'd be better for the bank to handle that. And if they let them accumulate, or even if they don't, they could come up with an hourly rate, so we would at least know what per hour we were paying them. And I do think that's fair. That $100 didn't include data entry.
Yeah, I didn't think it did. Well, that would be my preference as well. And I think Rhodes is amenable to it. So like Stephanie said, we showed him the spreadsheet, and there was only one item that bears more discussion on our part, but I would like to have them do it, and I don't think that's going to be an exorbitant amount.
Would we be seeing the applications before they input the data, or they're just going to input it and then we're going to see the list and make decisions about which ones we want them to process?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's the way I see it. And that, if the people don't have the correct information in the application, they would just indicate, that they would be disqualified. And it's not the bank's decision to disqualify. It's our criteria. So.
Yeah, he made a point about clarifying that we would hold them harmless and that all decisions will be ours and not theirs, and they're just a conduit.
And that we could do like a draft, like a letter that would be a loan approval, or if we needed to tell people that they did not receive it, but it could be on JDA letterhead, and the quote unquote decision would be from the JDA, but the bank could do the sending out of those letters on our behalf.
Sure, they could. I think we made a decision earlier that we were not going to notify people who did not receive. We're just going to send out notifications to those who received a loan.
Didn't Rhodes say he wanted to check with his banking regulators to make sure, because a bank was involved, that we could not send out the denial letters? I think he was going to.
He was going to check on that, but I think with us taking all of the heat for turning down applications and their bank just being processing loans, he'll check with somebody, but I don't think that's going to be an issue for them. But we'll wait to hear back from him on that. So the one item that we discussed a little bit, we asked for cash on hand, and Steph and I have been talking about this a little bit. what he was telling us, since he's processed a lot of PPP loans and EIDL loans, is that what a lot of businesses are doing is they're squirreling away their PPP money, and not maybe they've spent 30% of it or 40% of it, or holding 60% on their books. And it may be a large enough sum that they would have so much cash on hand that we would disqualify them because they had too much money in the bank sitting around waiting to be spent. So that was the one concern that he raised about that. And we talked about average daily balance, but that's still, if they're holding it, it'll be roughly that amount of money anyway that they're holding. So we need to decide how we're going to deal with cash on hand. Stephanie and I talked about the possibility of asking if they've received a PPP loan, and of that, how much do they still have on hand? And we could subtract that from the bank, their assets, their what they have in bank assets. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so if they did receive PPP, they were supposed to have spent it within a certain amount of time. If they didn't do that, and then they're still sitting on EIDL funds, which you don't have to spend it, you can hold it. There are certain things you can't spend it on. Why wouldn't we consider that cash on hand? Because that cash keep those businesses afloat, and focus on businesses that didn't receive those funds and aren't going to receive those funds, and try to keep them afloat. I kind of felt like that was the purpose of this funding, was to kind of catch the people who might have missed out or fallen through the net on the other ones.
That's fine by me.
I have some information about this. Many of those PPP loan deadlines were extended, and they may be extended again. But what's happening is people are afraid to bring staff back, and 60% of that money has to go to payroll. So they may be holding 40 or 50% of that because they don't have staff there to pay yet. That's the problem. So what if we gave like whatever balance they have left in their PPP, if we deduct 40% of it or something? But he seemed to imply that there were a whole lot of businesses in that ballpark where they won't spend the money, they can't spend it on the things they need to, and they're kind of stuck in the middle with all this cash that they can't spend.
Well, if that's the case, if a large majority of the businesses are all sort of following the same practice model of holding on to this money, then it should maintain across the board that the scores will accommodate for that, right? Like everyone's score will drop in succession with it.
Well, we are disqualifying people with more than 62 days, so they wouldn't even be eligible for a loan.
So I was going to say, though, if you back out that money, they might fall into that category. Guys, I don't know where to go. They might fall into that category where they would qualify for our loan, even though they still have all this money. So if we counted their money, then their score would disqualify them because they have too much cash on hand. But if we back the money out, they might qualify for our loan, and then they're going to be squirreling away more money while other people aren't. That's my only concern, is that we're just going to keep giving it to the same people, and it kind of feels contrary to the spirit of the program to me.
I am fine with ignoring anybody that got PPP, but we won't know they got it without asking them.
I don't think we necessarily have to ask them, but if their bank statements show a large sum of money, they're going to basically be on that 62-day limit, and they'll be self-disqualifying. I mean, we don't even have to ask if they got a PPP loan or where that money came from, quite frankly. We don't need to know.
I think that all of us were in agreement with that philosophy, and Rhodes brought it up, which is what gave us pause, that a banker suggesting that we give people money, even that have money. Like, I thought there might be something to that. But we can continue the way we had planned to, which was, if you have a lot of money, we're not giving you any money no matter where you got that money from.
That would be my take. Anybody else? Other opinions?
I think you've just echoed my concerns. So that was
Okay.
my
So it sounds to me like we're going to leave the cash on hand as is, not trying to take into account any kind of money they've been squirreling away. So
Just
that
maybe
makes
for
it
the first round, we'll see. Maybe they'll squirrel that away. It'll last them through the first round of our loan operations, and then maybe in the second round they've used up all of those reserves and now they qualify.
sure they can apply for a future round if we have the funds available. So okay. All right. Well, I think we resolved that issue and don't have to take any additional actions. That's what our current model goes by. So, my take is I'd like to move forward with hiring First American Bank as our administrator and getting a revised quote from them on what it would, or even an hourly rate, like Dan said, for the work. I would like for them to do the work, the part of their contract with us. Do the work, i.e., fill out the spreadsheets.
Can I bring up two issues before we move
Sure.
on to it? Well, first, let me just say, I thought it was a good submission. It was responsive to what we wanted. It solved our problems, basically. And next time you pass a First American banker on the street, thank them, because this was very timely and just what we needed. The two questions that I've got, and the discussions y'all had live with the bankers may have answered this. But in looking through this, the bank, it seems to me the bank anticipates that what we've got here is that our arrangement with them will be a funding agreement. We will provide them with money, and we said that we would, and they will make the loans, but it'll be a First American loan. It'll be on the bank's note form, and we'll have some control over that through our agreement with them. But if money won't be going out on the street with a promissory note signs paid to the order of the JDA. Is that okay? If that's the case, can you first let me know if it is, and secondly, let me know if that's okay with the board? It has to do with, who gets the credit for doing the good deed, and that ought to go to the ACC and the board.
Yeah, I don't think that if First American Bank is looking to get the credit for it. I didn't get it. I don't think it really came up as a discussion unless, okay, you have heard something from Rhodes differently.
Was there any discussion? I mean, the document has a form of promissory note attached, and I can work this out, but my question is, does the board care? Is it okay with us if the bank wants us to deposit the money with them so that we don't handle the money, and Ilka may say something about our director's liability insurance, which will give you a chuckle once we deposit that money, but the money is deposited with the bank. The bank uses it to make a loan on the bank's promissory note form as modified based on our input. And they basically treat it like a bank loan, which is good, subject to all the bank regulations and disclosures and everything like that. I mean, that's great. That takes us out of the business of lending. We're providing funding. The analogy is with the PPP program, except that's a guarantee instead of funding. But that's a good result from a legal perspective. I just want to make sure that the board is okay with that. I think you would be, but I just want to ask.
I see no problem with it. It was the only issue he brought up was the regulation issue of them turning down the loan. In other words, they didn't want First American to be the one to be viewed as turning down the loan. It had to be the JDA, and he was going to check with his regulators to see if that's the case. That was his only concern, I think.
The other issue he did raise that we talked about a little bit was the idea of whether the recipient, I guess, whether they would create a bank account for the proceeds of the loan to be deposited into. And we discussed that, and we thought, no, we didn't necessarily want to do it that way, that the funds should be able to be deposited into the account of any bank. Is that accurate, Stephanie and David?
It is.
Yes.
Right. They said it would be no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't. The board has to decide, but I didn't feel the need for them to open up yet another bank account just to receive the funds. They could provide the routing and account number information to the bank, and they'll transfer the funds into whatever account that they currently have without having to create a new one.
Dan, can you think of any reason why they wanted to structure it that way, where we put the money in their account, it sits there, they write the loans, and they only debit our account if there is a default? Is it so it could accrue interest and help us, or what are they doing that for?
I didn't honestly follow that myself. I mean, it's almost as though they're making the loan with their own funds.
Yeah.
They didn't talk about any interest except to say that they weren't getting the interest on the loan. So that's one thing that I think that we need to ask them about. And that may be a carryover from trying to respond to us having the PPP program in mind. So this does conceptually kind of follow it, except it's funding instead of a guarantee. Another thing related to that is we're going to have an agreement in place with the bank. They say they don't have a specimen agreement, which doesn't surprise me. But what they're describing is not a typical servicing agreement anyway. In a servicing arrangement, it's the lender's money and the servicer is just an agent. But the agreement with the bank can be based on the lender agreement that the SBA has with the banks. So that makes that agreement relatively straightforward to create. It doesn't have to be made up out of whole cloth, and it'll be familiar with the bank. But that particular question, I don't quite follow either. If it's our money on deposit in the bank, then even a checking account gets some modest amount of interest these days. I mean, really modest. And it's not like it's going to stay there very long. But what happens to that, the use of that money is a question. Do we get compensated for that? And if we don't get compensated for it, there's the answer to your question. We're putting our money in their bank. They're getting the use of the money until it's loaned. And that's a little bit of vigorous for them, which is okay with me.
Yeah.
I have no problems with them using the money till it's, till we spend it or till we assign it to awardees. If they end up using it for a little bit of time and make a little money off of it, I don't really care.
I mean, they are doing a commercial loan fee of $100-ish compared to $275, and he equated this to a community service, and I really feel like they're doing it to help the community and just trying to get a modicum of money just to cover their expenses. I'm fine with it.
I see it the same way.
Anybody see it differently? Okay, I think then we're in agreement that the money be deposited and they could use it until it's required by the JDA to create a loan for an awardee. So what do we need to do then to consummate this deal?
I think it's sufficient that we communicate with them that they're the lucky winner. And we don't feel like it's necessary to go into the RFP process. For one thing, we don't have any other contenders.
Right.
And find out who I need to be in touch with to work out the lending agreement. And as soon as we get that piece together, we're in business.
Great.
All right. Well, I'd like then to put forth the motion that we go with First American Bank and Trust as our administrator, pursuant to any agreement that we would have to, approve.
I'll second that, Erica.
All right. Sorry. Any other discussion about that motion? We got a second from Erica. All right. Hearing no discussion. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? All right. Well, we're one step away from having an administrator for it.
Great. So tonight when we're done with the meeting, Dan, I'll send an email connecting you with Rhodes McClanahan.
Yes, please. That sounds good.
Okay.
And then, as soon as you have a draft of the agreement that that's agreed on both sides, submit that to the JDA so we can approve it?
Will do.
Okay. What kind of time frame do you see it take to get that agreement hammered out and in front of us?
I probably should have this is unusual for a lawyer, actually discussing what should be in an agreement before you draft it, but I should probably have a discussion with him to answer, those two questions I just asked. Then I can prepare a draft based on the PPP form, which he'll be familiar with. He'll get it. He'll want his lawyer to look at it. But if we keep it simple and in line with what they're familiar with, I can have that conversation with him. I have no time at all tomorrow, but maybe Friday or Monday, and knock out the agreement in a couple of days after that. So if he's able to get whatever lawyer he uses to review bank documents, most banks use standard documents. They don't create documents. So he'll want somebody to look at this probably. It'll be towards the end of next week at the earliest before we'll have an agreed document, and it'll probably spill into the week after, but no longer than that.
Okay. Well, we need to take official action on the agreement once it's crafted to your satisfaction.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out what the time frame is going to be for us to actually have the agreement in place.
For planning purposes, week after next. You might wait to actually set the meeting until I can give you some feedback, but I feel pretty sure it'll be week after next.
Well, we have a lot of things to talk about that doesn't require that agreement, so we could still meet and have a special called session just to approve the administrator agreement. So,
okay.
All right.
One thing that that Rhodes did say to David and Stephanie and I is that they feel that they can stand up the program within a matter of a couple of days, probably, once a contract is agreed to.
Mm-hmm. I got to tell y'all, I'm delighted with this. It would have been a setback for us not to have had somebody to do this or to have somebody who wasn't prepared to do it. This is really good for our programs.
Yeah, it certainly speeds up the process of getting it done, just to have the one. So, all right. Well, I think that should take care of that agenda item. The next item that pretty much, in my opinion, covers old business. Well, I don't know if we want to talk about the in your staff report or about the liability insurance, or because it is kind of old business.
Oh, do it now. It's funny.
Okay, I can use a good laugh.
So I've been following up now pretty aggressively for several weeks with GERMA on when we could get a quote from them. And the regular person was out of town this week, so I reached out to the backup, and she had an answer to me pretty quickly. And she said that she apologized, but that she had talked with, I guess, whatever their governing group is, and that they felt there was a lot of risk with this group of embezzlement of the amount of funds, and they were nervous at the amount of funds going through and the risk exposure. So they declined to provide a quote for us. So she referred me to Chastain and Associates in town because, they work with City of Winterville. So I reached out to Chaz this morning, and I got an email from him at about 10 after 3. So I sent him some information back really quick before I logged on here. And then I also reached out to David Linder at our Development Authority for Athens-Clarke Unified Government, and he shared with me their insurer. And early this morning as well, I sent them a note letting them know what we want to do, but I haven't quite heard back from them yet.
Okay, well, we still have time to get that nailed down, but
this is notwithstanding the fact we'll never see the money.
I know. I know.
Yeah, it's not going to touch my hands. I have my Bahamas account, but anyway, okay. All right, well, thanks for that update. Now on to new business. Basically, the new businesses talk about minimally at a high level about the grant, the CARES grant. And I don't know what the constraints are. I know people want to spend it or want to give out grants yesterday, but we have to decide if we're going to use a different method for determining what they're going to receive, different from our current loan But I kind of at a high level, I thought maybe we could. I know Ilka, you've been involved, Dan, you've been involved. Just kind of a high level, what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So, Mayor Gertz, do you want to share just kind of the highlight, and then we can talk about the to-do pieces of it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the desire is to provide some support as quickly as possible, and obviously it also has to be appropriate and legal. And so, information that we've built for the loan program makes perfect sense for the grant program too. Ideally, even really sort of looking at some of the same metrics and the same size of provision. I guess an open question that I've contemplated, I might have even mentioned on the last call, and I've mentioned in conversations with some other people, is do we want to actually conjoin the programs to say, you're getting $12,000 and $8,000 of that is a grant and $4,000 is a loan, with some prospective prepayment restrictions to ensure that the funds get into use. I'm curious about people's thoughts about that.
I have some thoughts. Of course, I probably predicted that I would have thoughts. I've thought about the conjoined plan, and that could certainly be an option. But what if someone did not want to take out a loan? Because I was talking to Michelle at Northeast Georgia Business Alliance, and she explained that the kind of paperwork we're asking for would be very difficult to obtain from some businesses. So that made me start thinking about, well, what if we had an application where they could say they want a grant or a loan or both, where we could give them some of both. And then I thought, well, okay, we could use the grant and say we're going to do $12,500 grants, and we'll figure out how much to give them based on the same exact formula as if they were getting a loan, only they won't pay it back using all the same documents. But that conversation I had with her made me think, we're going to miss a bunch of businesses that could really use this help. So I thought, what if they say they want a grant, all we require is for them to, like, we do it based on employment. So we're paying for jobs, saving jobs. So give them, let's say, $500 per FTE they have up to 10. So if they want to apply for the loan calculation is not changed. If they want to apply for the grant, they just have to give us a list of their employees' names and the average hours worked on a basic week for a quarter, and we calculate an FTE and figure out how much to give them. And it's going to be a first come, first serve with that approach. So that's two other ways we could think about doing it.
With the FTE, and I like that approach. I guess I would want to make sure that we were ensuring that people were either being 1099 or W2, rather than kind of under the table. And I mean, I'll just be frank. We know that there's some local businesses that are doing a lot of cash transactions to avoid paying payroll taxes and others. And I don't want to support those businesses through a grant program.
I've thought about that too. And I have done some work to build like a spreadsheet that we would have them fill out that would list out their employees. And that would kind of like be their word of honor that they meet the requirements and they're getting this money, with the caveat, and maybe Dan could answer about this, that we could say when they take that grant, like the note that we give them or whatever you call the award letter that says we may at a later date request Department of Labor earnings reports, 941s, W-2, like list out all the things we might ask them for that maybe we never will, but if they know that we could ask them for and they would have to turn it over, then we could claw back that money if we could. Basically scare them into giving us the right information. That's what I'm saying.
Why don't we just ask for 941s up front?
Because that does indicate FTE, honestly. There's not a document that will prove that you've had full-time equivalents, because even in the Department of Labor, it says the number of employees per quarter. That could be somebody that worked 1 hour or 40 hours.
The business occupation tax records do record the number of employees, but it's sort of a single point in time each year.
And it's also not proved.
Yeah, right.
It's not proven either. There's
Yeah.
not really, besides a payroll report where you actually do the calculations yourself, there's no way to document or prove that, honestly. I mean, just knowing what I know. You're on mute.
Ooh.
Erica.
Yeah, my phone.
Oh.
My internet keeps going out, so I had to log in on my phone, and that's been. What if the guide? So people who had higher payrolls that apply for the grant would, I don't know. So we'd be saving. Oh, I see what you're saying. Are you saying more hours, more jobs, more salary? I mean, what's our metric for employment?
Jobs. David,
So,
I was talking to David about this. He made a good point that maybe tying it to wages could be not a message we want to get into.
okay. Yeah, I agree.
Because we don't know what their hourly rate is or what they pay them per hour, and we don't want to ask that information. So.
Because a minimum wage job is better than no job.
Yeah, I do know that with EIDL, you got that up to $10,000 advance grant. It was $1,000 per employee. They asked for your number of FTE employees. You typed the number in, and no documentation was ever requested to back it up. That was a federal program. So I don't feel like the scrutiny on us to go figure out if this stuff is fraudulent or true should be any higher than on the federal government, because it's federal money. They didn't do it.
Well, although it was passed through the state, so unfortunately there's also state regulations that are on it. So that being said, Dan probably
They
knows.
can't do it though. The state can't even verify that. Like, without doing an audit of someone's payroll records, you cannot verify full-time equivalency because you don't know how many hours people are working. You just don't.
Yeah, I would like, I mean,
What a business
I know there's
license.
been this.
That's self-reported too, though.
Yeah, yeah, it is, but yeah.
It is a snapshot in time, and it was previous to now.
Erica, you're breaking up. You're
Erica,
completely breaking up.
you might try just turning off your video. That might help your connection a little better.
I don't hear anything.
You went mute on us, Erica. Well, there you go.
The dog started barking.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, I actually would like to know what other constraints, at the state level that Dan, you could speak to is, what can and we cannot do with the CARES money.
I will give you some workable parameters, but the honest answer is nobody knows. Because they're making it up as they go. But for our purposes, there's some basics. We're still constrained by the powers of the JDA under state law. So that trade, industry, and agriculture bright line is still there. Gifts and gratuities is still there. I think some of the guidance that's come out recently from the state says if there are both federal requirements and state requirements, you must abide by the more restrictive. So no gifts or gratuities, which means we can do a grant. The state does grant. The state does grant by taking title to property, which we're not, we could do that for some of these things, but that's, I don't think, what we intend to do. So we have to document that we're getting equivalent consideration, which is what we're doing with the loan program, and the jobs and whatever else we are happy with would satisfy that. Another major constraint is that you could look through our application and guidelines and everything, and you won't find pandemic or COVID-19 or epidemic in that at all. And we all know what it's for, but relief of disease is not a JDA function. But this is federal money, which is, like casino night, most ways. They do what they want to with it, but they can put strings on it. And the strings attached to this are that the use of proceeds has to be COVID relief related. So going back to our use of proceeds, we're basically making a loan in our loan program in exchange for economic development related stuff. We can make a grant in exchange for economic development related stuff that also relieves COVID-19. And there are a number of examples of what they are there. I've looked at in depth at a couple of programs that are in place recently that I thought were pretty good. But we're going to have that general restriction, got to be trade, industry, and agriculture, and another restriction, got to be COVID-19 relief related. And we can give some examples, and they can be exclusive if you want them to be, or we can make a decision on a case-by-case basis. But I don't think that conjoining the programs would result in us having a document that was identical, except that grant appears where loan otherwise appears in our documentation. It would look very similar, but it's also going to have some differences in it. And I kind of visualize this as another round. This is a CARES Act round of JDA programs, this one being a grant, and for those two purposes, but which have to be captured in the documentation. But it will resemble largely what we've done already, and we've got the infrastructure in place. We've got an administrator in place if you want to do it that way. So we'd be able to stand up this program pretty quickly, I think.
Could I screen share? Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I just want to make sure that if we do have to modify our criteria, I need to know, based upon regulations, we need to know what we need to modify, unless it's identical. Unless you're saying that we could use our identical scoring for the grant as for the loan, then we're done. But I don't know that's true.
We differentiated between eligibility and call it merit or the score. So you can be eligible either by having a COVID-19 need or something, or you can gain a score where the choices that you pick to get some points all satisfy COVID-19 in one way or another. But the choices are going to have to be different. Ilka, would this be a good point for you to call up the timeline?
Yes, let me do that.
There's going to have to be some work done on it.
Can I throw something into, not to interrupt, but something Dan and I spoke about last week, and the possibility of Winterville including some of the CARES Act funding that we have for a possible Winterville phase. And Kelly, that's something you and I can also talk about.
I heard you mention that at the city council meeting, Don, and I was curious as to what you thought that might look like. But
yeah, and I think Dan and I kind of started discussing it last week. Dan, were you able to talk to David Ellison, our city attorney?
I'm sorry, I haven't connected yet. That's on me, but I will.
Ilka, could you make it just a little bit bigger?
Oh, bigger or less big?
No, I can't see the fine print. I have to put my glasses on, I guess.
Oh, okay, it's okay. How's that? I can go bigger.
I mean, the comments at the right are not as important as the two columns.
Yeah, the comments at the right are Dan's, and I incorporated them in on the left. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay. So this is sort of a rough draft timeline of both of them together and how we might go through this process. As you can see, we're right about here, JDA meeting. So on the right is the grant and on the left is the loan.
So we're in row 6.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the bolded dates on the left are when we have a JDA meeting. Pretty much the Wednesdays. I just went ahead and sort of bolded them in there so that we could see potential dates when decisions could be made. Of course, we can meet more frequently than that, but I just put the Wednesdays in there as markers.
Well, to the extent that we can get things done and decided, I'm fine with meeting more than once a week if we can speed up the process. Otherwise, doesn't make much sense to do it any sooner than that.
And so from what Dan shared, it sounds like this square might be able to be achieved a little bit faster. But if we are thinking that we might manage the CARES business grants, and that we might also want to use the bank as our administrator, then we might be able to potentially combine some steps.
And Ilka, didn't they send an email today that said for $10 an application, they could do the same thing with the grant than they're doing with the loan?
Yeah, let me pull it up and I'll read it out loud. It says, assuming we use the same scoring system on both, or I would think somewhat similar, we could pull the documentation and key the necessary fields to get the score. You would just need to provide the decision for both based off the score. On the grant piece, First American Bank and Trust could do that for $10 per grant issued, which means we would pull the information, key the data, then create the ACH file to debit a JDA account and credit each grantee. We would want to make sure there is an approval from JDA before that file is sent, the ACH file. I do think being able to roll them out together maybe might make sense, because everyone would want the grant probably first as a first choice.
The grant program is a lot less work for the bank. There's no after closing administration to it at all for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, to me, the gating factor is deciding the appropriate criteria for the grant as opposed to loan, because I'm hearing that we cannot just use our scoring thing exclusively as the only way to determine when we give out a grant.
Well, let me split a hair there.
Okay.
We can use our scoring matrix to decide who gets a loan, but it has to be somebody who has a need to use the loan proceeds in a permitted way. So you can have, in fact, Ilka and I have been emailing back and forth on this. What I recall Stephanie saying in our last meeting is that the spreadsheet we've got now, which is a great tool, calculates the loan amount. So if that's correct, if it's not correct, it's not on the spreadsheet, it's on me. But if it works that way, we can make it work that way for the grant. And that, really reduces, it automates everything except the beforehand process of deciding what the acts are that gain points and what those points are. Now, what I can do to help move this forward is, I think, we have a lot of local governments trying to do this now. They're doing it in a lot of different ways, just like the loan programs early on. Some are good, some are bad. Probably none of them is perfect, but of the ones that I've looked at, I would feel comfortable sending the group a link to the Columbus program. So it's got their criteria, it's got the application form, and ours would not be identical. I can tell you now, it wouldn't be identical because they're not doing it through a JDA. But it will tell you what we're looking for, so you can be thinking about what sort of things you would say, okay, that promotes industry, agriculture, trade, and relieves COVID-19, and it's something that we feel like would be good for the community to get a jump start.
So that is a CARES program that you're going to give us a link to?
It is.
Well, that'll help us with the COVID criteria that we need to come up with. This has been bothered. Go ahead.
The public benefit requirement and the eligibility criteria we already have for the loan, if we were to change that and add one thing that said, you've experienced some financial problems because of COVID, like you just agree that you have, then we've kind of covered COVID. What I'm getting to is I would like to make it where they have a choice to apply for a loan or grant or both. Most people would apply just for the grant, but some people may need more than what we're willing to give them, so they may want both. but I don't see why it can't be identical if we add a COVID thing in there that's for the loan and the grant.
Here's the difference. If you qualify for one of our loans, you are agreeing to provide certain public benefit. You don't necessarily have to spend the loan proceeds in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
With the grant, you do. You've got to spend the grant proceeds doing a COVID approved thing. So it's not enough to be affected by it. You've got to agree to use the grant proceeds to do something about it.
Is that done at the time that you accept the money in a letter that you have to sign, or does it have to be something you agree to before you apply?
It would all be done up front. But the only difference between that and what you said earlier is that I have been affected and I agree to do something. We've got to know what something is. And it can be a multiple choice or it can be a narrative. But it can work pretty much the way you described it, except that there's got to be a commit. In addition to the public benefit commitment, there's got to be a commitment regarding the use of proceeds.
Okay, that's not a problem.
Is that on the website, that Columbus website, the specifics?
Yeah. There are any number of examples of what's an eligible use of proceeds and an ineligible use of proceeds. I need to get my head into this deeper, and I'll try to come up with something as general as possible. So we may conceivably end up with something where we say, I've been affected by COVID-19 and I'm going to use the grant proceeds to relieve COVID-19 in a way approved by something. I'll come up with a something, a citation or something. But we're actually helping people stay out of trouble and, maybe helping us stay out of trouble if we give them some examples that qualify and they choose one or more of them. That way they know and we know that what's being done is right.
The CARES, the stuff that Columbus uses is really very limited, and I thought they'd be able to use it to pay employees, but you actually cannot use it for payroll, according to Columbus.
I haven't gotten into that deeply, but remember the difference is we are paying for public benefit. And with the loan program, we get the public benefit. We don't ask, what money did you spend in order to achieve that?
Right.
So we have to get public benefit on the one hand, and that public benefit either has to be limited to COVID-19 or there has to be an additional commitment to expend the grant proceeds in a COVID-19 approved way. And I don't, if it's a grant and we're not financing fixed assets, particularly if we're not financing fixed assets that we're going to take title to, I think it's okay, for example, for them to take that, as far as state law goes, for them to take that money and use it in working capital. I'm not sure that under federal law that's okay. I think that probably those Columbus examples are things that people have decided are compliant, which is kind of what I'm saying, that we're better off having a list of things we think comply and that are legal under state law, and in addition are what we want to achieve in our jurisdiction. That's as far as I've gotten with it.
Well, it sounds like we have one website, that gives some data, but if they can't use it if Columbus says they can't use it for COVID employee payroll expenses, then I don't want to put that restriction on them. So we need to collectively. It'd be nice to have an idea of what the constraints are from the feds. I know it's loose and they're pretty vague about everything, but
who's in charge of policing compliance? Like, how do we know? Do we come back to them in a year and say, show us what you did with the money?
I'm not aware of us having to close out with them like we would with a state program, but ultimately the agency responsible enforcement is the FBI.
Oh, as long as it's not us.
Yeah.
There's a portal into which we enter all CARES Act expenditures, but those are big lumpy numbers in line items.
there is a Q&A on the Columbus website. The question, can I use funds for payroll or benefits expenses? Answer no. Now,
Very clear.
I can track that down and find out, whether that's Columbus or whether that's in the law. Right now, I can't tell you.
Yeah, see, without understanding what those constraints are, we can come up with whatever we think is allowed and not allowed.
Well, one other weird thing they have on theirs is that you can't use this money for future expenses outside of a certain period. So it puts that, where they've got to give it back if they don't use it. Payroll is people's biggest expense.
There's a 4-page federal guide and I think an 11 or 12-page state guide. And I don't remember seeing in either of those that the payroll is not allowable. This is, and I may have mentioned this before, it's not unlike when I was a public ed administrator and I'd have to spend federal funds, and those funds would filter through a federal regulator, a state authority, and then the local school district. And, you sort of whittle down your options every time. So, I would encourage us to think expansively for the reasons you've stated.
Yeah, and I'll do that. That's the purpose of that due diligence period that's in line in row 6. Now there's some homework we have to do. This will be a program that's tailored for what we want in our jurisdiction within the bounds of what we can do. We're not just going to copy the Columbus program. It's just to give you an idea of what folks are doing, and it's a better example than some I've seen.
Is there any interest in seeing the modified application that I worked on to try to work this into the same application so we're not having to do 2 complete different applications?
Yeah.
If y'all don't want to see it, we don't have to, but I have done it already.
It's not the spreadsheet that you shared yesterday, right?
It's actually the application.
Sure. Is it not in the drive?
It is, but you wouldn't have known it was there. I don't actually know if it is there, honestly.
I don't think it is. We've shared the link together.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
I've seen it, and we can certainly take a look at it. I'm not sure it's going to move the needle in terms of what criteria we're going to have to come up with for the CARES part of it.
That's true, but we can look at the framework of how we could work it in. The issue is the bank thinks we should roll it out at the same time. The timeline kind of indicates we roll it out at the same time. So without having 2 completely different applications, it makes sense to not make people do 2, to save them the time and do 1, which is why I kind of did this. And the only big difference is asking them, are they just wanting the emergency loan? Let me get to the public view of it.
While you're toggling to that, Stephanie, I'll say, I would be glad to schedule a half-hour meeting in the next several days. If there's just a little bit of finessing required to roll this out the 24th at the same time as the loan program.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
as long as we go ahead.
If you want to just do the emergency grant, these are the options. We can, this is my note to y'all, ask them for all of those documents that we already asked for the loan, and use the loan calculating formula to decide how much of $12,500 to give them. Without doing a bunch of work, we have to stick with the same number because that's what the calculations are based on. Or we can make it simpler, and this is what I was suggesting. How many employees did you have? And if they put in more than we allow, it won't let them. And so if they put in 10, then they will get $500 per employee, which is a max of 5,000. And to upload a spreadsheet that lists each employee by name, last 4 digits, and average hours worked. And then I have a spreadsheet sample that they can use, and it's very simple. And that's the extent of what we ask them. The question that comes up that Dan's talking about is eligibility criteria and how they're going to use the money. So let's say they wanted to get the grant. All we have to do is ask them in the document, like before they sign, to attest that they're going to use the money for COVID purposes. And it's just a section that we'll add that only those that ask for the grant will get. Does that make sense?
It does to me.
In that situation, Stephanie, what would the definition be that we are giving for what COVID related is?
That's what Dan has to figure out is if what Columbus says is not actually what CARES can pay for, but what they want to choose to pay for, he's going to research what it can pay for. And those are the things we're going to have to list, is that you agree to only spend your money on these items. But it's just adding a new conditional section with some check boxes, just like we added for you agree to the following. It's a special one that's for people applying for the grant part. So for this application, they could pick to apply for the loan and get the portion of $12,500 that their scoring gets them. And they could also ask for the grant, provide their FTE, and get the amount of the grant tied to their FTE gets them. So the benefit of doing this is that businesses that may not be as legitimate as what we're hoping for the loan could give us their FTEs. Maybe we want to check on it. Maybe we can't. Maybe we don't. But they're having to attest that it's true, perjury, all that stuff. And we're able to get them money in their hands fast without them having to go hire an accountant to figure out all these numbers that we need for the loan. The FTE is really simple to figure out, and they're done. And that will really placate a lot of businesses that miss out on PPP, EIDL, that are going to miss out on this loan. It will allow us to address those people easily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I were an applicant and I had to put in an FTE, I would naturally assume that money's got to be spent for FTEs. I mean, for the people.
Yeah,
that's a good point, David. That is a good point.
I mean, that's what I would assume, and that it's only available for that purpose. So using FTE as our metric makes sense if people are getting the money to help pay for the employees.
Yeah, I think you're right that we won't be able to use that if they absolutely cannot use it for payroll. That makes no sense.
well,
I'm
we
not-
don't know that they can't, right?
I know. Yeah, if Dan finds out they can't.
It's question number 1 on my list of things to do.
Okay.
That's all
even
I
if
have.
even if they could, using FTE would, in some people's mind, implicate, unless we say you can use it for all these things other than payroll, but we're going to only ask you for basically payroll information to determine how much you get.
Silly. Well, I can't think of any other way to give grants out to people and base it on some criteria without asking for a whole ton of documents that I feel is the barrier between people getting help and not getting help. And the bank even said that. They said there's so many people that couldn't get PPP because they just didn't have the paper to back up their request.
Mm-hmm.
Does this help any? Suppose, everybody files tax returns. And there are industry standards for, I'm guessing, compensation to workers in different fields of work. So if we have somebody's compensation structure, what they've claimed is compensation expense on their tax return, and we've got the industry standard, we can divide that and come up with a number of FTEs, which might be wrong, but probably not wildly wrong.
Well, that was something I brought up with Michelle Pearson, and she said, believe it or not, many of the businesses that they work with, sadly, don't even have that. And I realize this is public money. We shouldn't be giving it to businesses that just don't have legitimate business records, but it's a big issue.
I feel for them, but we really shouldn't.
I don't disagree with you.
I know I should have asked this probably the first meeting we had, but we are constrained by trade, industry, and agriculture. Do we know unequivocally what businesses, if somebody applies, do we know that they fit into that category? Who's going to get excluded? What businesses are going to be excluded because we have to stick to those 3 categories, or is it so broad that we can do anything?
Very few. The Supreme Court thinks that a senior living facility is industry. So as long as it's something that is clearly outside the commercial field, like single family housing, it'd be very rare that we have a case that we'd have a question about.
Okay.
Would a musical band that's incorporated as an entity be a?
Do you pay for tips, or do you have a contract and
Yeah, contracts, formal bookings.
I'm pretty liberal with stuff like that. I'd loan to you.
Okay. Well, I just was curious is if we've got pretty much the kitchen sink covered.
Can I throw one war story out now that you got me started? What about a grocery store? Do you think a grocery store is commerce?
Yeah.
I had to take that to the Georgia Supreme Court. Superior Court judge in Cobb County said one of those destination Krogers with the, you buy your groceries, get a hot meal, listen to music, attend a book reading. Said that wasn't commerce, but fortunately the Supreme Court said it was. Opinions can differ, but I'm leaning pretty heavily towards most things being commercial and trade and industry.
Well, commercial is a arching term. Trade, industry, and agriculture are more specific types of commerce, are they not?
If a nursing home is industry, what is it?
Okay. All right. Well, we can leave it at that.
I'm not usually arguing in favor of doing something, but there you have it. I do think that way.
Okay. All right. So we've kind of gotten a high level here. I don't know whether we got 20 minutes until. Go ahead, Ilka.
Here's a really basic question. One of the things that we would need to do, I guess, in collaboration with Mayor Gertz is if the JDA is willing to take on these grant funds, then I need to work with our attorney's office on an agreement, I guess an intergovernmental agreement between ACCUG and the JDA. Is the group in agreement? I guess that I could start working on that with them. I have a draft of one that I guess, Dan, I'll give a first stab at it. It's hard to know if I work with you or with the county attorney's office, which role my hat will be on. I think first my hat will be the ACC hat, since they were, I guess, pledged to the economic development department, but I would definitely like to make sure that you are reviewing it as well.
And this is for both the $1 million and the $1.6 million?
That'll be the 1.6 million. To my understanding, the 1 million has already been conveyed.
That's right.
We need some paperwork on that, though. I mean,
I've never seen it.
I have not either. Yeah. Okay. So I'll follow up on they asked me when I asked them about the contract between ACCUG and the JDA for this 1.6 million. They asked me if I had a copy of the intergovernmental agreement for the first million. and I was looking through all my files and I couldn't find it. And I said, yeah, I don't have it. And so they sent me a draft. So we may need to do both at once.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. So Mayor, in your ACCUG role, I'm going to start working on that with our.
Yeah.
I feel like I need different hats for this.
Right.
So I'll start working on that with Sherry Hines, and then
Perfect.
when we've got it to a place, Dan will share it with you.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And if simultaneously, Dan can be tracking down that certainty around allowable expenditures for the grant program, and Stephanie, if you can just be interacting with Dan to use his legal knowledge to modify the application appropriately. I would love to. I mean, even if it's only for a 15-minute kind of gathering, get together. I don't know, Monday to say thumbs up.
Yeah, I guess I would like to see, as the chair of the JDA, I'd like to see what those criteria are. I mean, we can stick it on the website and modify it, but I would like to see it myself.
So you're thinking this Monday, the 24th, to have another special call meeting?
Yeah, just as soon as reasonable.
Okay. Let me,
Okay,
everybody pull up your
Well,
calendars.
is that a sufficient time to get to have something?
it's really not. Can I have a couple of extra days?
Sure.
Okay, what day are you thinking maybe Dan would work for you?
Oh, let me see. What I'm doing tomorrow is long range planning for me. So let's see here. Well, we've already got a JDA meeting on Wednesday of next week. At least it's on my calendar.
It's not official. I think we
we-
tried to be on your dance card for every Wednesday, Dan, just in case.
Well, the advantage is it's saved on my calendar. I've got the time blocked.
Okay, so 3:30
Mm-hmm.
to 5. Okay. Does that work for everyone else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So when we get off this call, I'll send out that invite.
All right. Now, kind of looking ahead, Dan said that he would have a draft agreement with First American Bank by next Friday, right? If I heard correctly?
Yes.
And, we can wait till the following Wednesday to approve it, or we can have a special call meeting on Monday, whatever that date is, just to approve that so we got it under our belt.
That would be the 31st, David.
Is everybody amenable to having a special call meeting on the 31st so that we can, with the sole purpose of approving the contract with First American Bank? Are we okay with that?
That's fine.
Okay, does
so we
this
have
time
two.
of day work for everyone as well?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Are we going to have a
Okay.
motion for this for me to put down, or?
Yeah, I'd like to so move that we have these two special call meetings, one next Wednesday and one the 31st. Or a second to that motion?
Erica seconds.
Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Okay. So next Monday, we're going to be talking about the CARES criteria. And then we'll talk about no, but not Monday. I'm sorry, next Wednesday. And then the following Monday, we'll talk about the contract for First American Bank. All right. Does that sound good to everybody? Is there any other new business that we need to talk about? We do need to review that timeline and try to, if we're going to do all this together, we're certainly going to have to figure out what criteria we're going to use to determine how much grant money to give them. We have one proposal of FTEs. Dan was saying we should just go with require the documentation and go with that. So we have to decide that too for the CARES money. Don't want people to be thinking about that, so we can talk about it maybe next
Wednesday.
Wednesday, sorry. All right. Well, I got Monday on my head. Okay. Any other new business? Ilka, do you have any other staff information?
I think I've given you enough exciting things for 1 week.
Okay. All right, and Dan, you got
I'll spare you any further law stuff for the rest of the day.
Okay. All right, we've already done setting our date for next two meetings, so that's been taken care of. So do I have a motion for us to adjourn? I'll put forth a motion for us to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, Kelly seconds. All those in favor, say or raise your hand.
Aye.
All right, all those opposed? All right, we are adjourned. See you guys next Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you.